Hello friends! I thought that I would do a quick video showing how I go through the process of looking at composition. My intent here isn't to show the lighting and editing of the image, but to get across how I end up with a final composition. In fact, I'm going to be doing a series of these videos beginning with this very simple composition, and in future videos moving on to more complex compositions. Before we get into that, however, I'd like to point out some pieces of equipment that I use on a regular basis and that I highly recommend. You'll notice here that I have some Apple boxes. I really prefer to work with what I call a pedestal setup rather than placing a still life on a tabletop or sawhorses, and these Apple boxes are a perfect solution. These particular ones are made by Matthews in California, but I've recently discovered that you can find some excellent boxes on Amazon which are sold as exercise or plyo boxes at very reasonable prices. Make sure to get at least 2 or preferably 3 so you can build a small tower for your still life set. I use these virtually every day. Also, I really love this Manfrotto Magic Arm with 2 super clamps for holding cards and other things. It's a very handy piece of equipment that I absolutely love. You'll also notice that I'm using a camera stand. That's kind of left over from my commercial photography days where it was completely necessary. It certainly makes things a lot easier when it comes to changing the camera height. And one last thing that I can't recommend enough, and that is a good geared tripod head. This one is made by Arca Swiss, but many manufacturers make geared heads. They really are the best thing for critical studio work. Ball heads, which certainly have their uses, are not ideal for the studio. So here I am, kind of roughly figuring out the camera height. I'm looking at this very simple subject, but I know that light painting is going to make it incredibly dimensional and impactful. Here's my first capture, but I decided here that the camera position was a little too high. By the way, I always shoot tethered and I highly recommend it, and I always make a capture for judging the image. It's much better, more detailed, and much more informative than judging the image on the back of a camera. This goes for composition, focus issues, details, and camera straightness. That said, I am using live view on the back of my camera as a rough guide. So I decided to lower the camera height a bit. I believe that, generally speaking, a lower camera height yields a more interesting camera angle in general. It makes the subject rather iconic, and with a lower angle, the image is more about the graphic shape of the subject. In this case, however, I felt that the camera was a little too low now. I'd like to see a bit of the ellipse in the vessel. I believe that seeing the ellipse will make it a little more informative and will speak to the actual form and function of this particular subject. So I'm going to raise it back up a little, and then, of course, I'll shoot another capture to make sure that I like how much I'm seeing of the ellipse at the top. Here's that capture, and it looks great in terms of the ellipse at the top, but I now feel that I'd love to see a better view of one of those wonderful handles. So I decided to come back to the set and rotate the vessel a bit clockwise, and here's that capture. I think this is perfect, and now I can go ahead and set my critical focus point, check my depth of field, make the camera perfectly level, and these are things that are always better to judge on a computer screen when tethering. And then, of course, I'll shoot it using light painting. I'll also use my method of sculptural masking when editing. Here's the final edited image. You can see that light painting, along with my masking method, has given this very simple subject a beautiful 3-dimensional shape. And I love to say that simple images, in my opinion, have a greater potential for impact than do very complex images. This is something that I continually teach my students, as sometimes human nature causes us to place too many things in a still life. Making a beautiful image is not about how many interesting subjects you are including in a photograph, but more about how you can use lighting and editing to create a gorgeous image, even with a simple subject such as this. Thanks very much for watching, and I look forward to making more videos on basic composition concepts. This is Harold Ross.